Ever written a research paper before, I bet you've done one of two things. You probably found facts that are relevant to your topic, and maybe you found arguments that other people have made in order to say, look, they think this and I think it too, so we both must be right. And then you lay these things at your reader's feet and expect them to tell you what a great job you've done. But if you think the purpose of a research paper is just to show how much material you can amass about your topic and deliver it up to your reader for their edification, then I'm here to tell you that there's more to the story. We all have Google and reference librarians to help us find information, so your job as a writer is to actually do something with it, preferably something relatively original. My name is Lusia Zaitseva, and I'm the founder of IvyWrite.com. I also teach writing at Harvard University, and in this video, I'm showing you the #1 thing you need to do to start thinking and writing like real scholars do. In college, a research paper is actually a chance to practice a few super important real-world skills. And if all you've done before is locate sources in order to report what others have said, then there's no reason to feel bad. You were training to do the real heavy lifting, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So what distinguishes a high school research paper from the kind of research paper that you'd write in college? Well, actually a few things, but in this video we're going to talk about the #1 most important, and we actually already began to talk about it in the previous video. And here it is. Once you've got your good analytical question, in other words, your research question, don't rush out to find sources about it or on the topic of your question. Instead, ask yourself this. What do I need to do to answer my question, and what sources do I need to help me do it? Let's look at an example to help you see what I mean. An excellent analytical question for a research paper could be something like, to what extent has Greta Thunberg's youth been an integral component of her climate activism, and what might this mean for her message as she grows older? This is a great research question because it's concrete and specific, it has no factual answer, and reasonable people could disagree about it. And you can't just answer it by making things up inside your head or resorting to generalities. You'd actually have to do research in order to do this question justice. So if we ask ourselves the question I cited a moment ago, what do I need to do in order to answer this question, and what sources do I need to help me do it, we'd realize a few things. First of all, we're clearly going to need at least one, and preferably a few, examples of how Greta instrumentalizes her youth in her rhetoric, and preferably also an article or two about her, invariably written by adults, in order to see the impact of that rhetoric on her audience. So a text about Thunberg would help us accomplish this, and while we're at it, it could also be interesting to look at a photo of her, maybe from a magazine cover, because presumably an adult helped her decide what to wear, how to stand, and clearly someone chose the title of the essay or article that accompanies that photo. So already we have 3 needs for sources to help us do something super specific. We need a primary example of her rhetoric from Greta's own mouth. We need an article about her to help measure the reception of her message, and something like a photo to help us see how she's staged in the public eye. But that's not all we need. If we're talking about activism, and climate activism specifically, we're probably going to need some historical context. So we might logically wonder, what are the precedents of Greta's activism, both as it relates to climate change and in social causes more broadly? And by the way, you'll notice that that is a kind of analytical question, but it's not strong enough to stand on its own because it does have a factual answer, even if we don't know what it is yet. And while we're at it, it would also be interesting to broaden our search and look for precedents for child activism more generally, as it relates to other social movements. So now, in addition to the first 3 sources we decided we needed, we have 2 more, and our sources are going to end up being really varied and interesting as a result. So to recap, we need an example of Greta's rhetoric and some way to measure its reception. So we settled on a text written by her and an article about her, as well as perhaps a magazine cover that stages her in some interesting way. And then we need a source to help us understand the history of climate activism, as well as something to help us contextualize children as figureheads in social movements. There's at least one more thing we'd want to figure out before we got too far in. Has anyone else made arguments about Greta's youth and its role in her rhetoric? When people are just starting out in research, it's tempting to feel that if the answer is yes, you've been scooped, or somehow someone has stolen the thing you were going to say.
That was my joke. I said it. I said that!
Actually, it's great news if you find a source that's already doing something similar to what you thought you might end up doing, because what it means is you can use that argument as a starting point to make your own, more specific and detailed and nuanced. In other words, build off of what that person is saying, either by the sheer force of your mighty intellect, or by bringing in another source that first source maybe didn't know about, but helps you say something new. For example, maybe you think that other source generally has it right when it comes to the power of Greta's youth in her rhetoric, but they overlook an important component, which is her gender. Oh, and if you're really good, you could find a source that has nothing to do with Greta or climate activism at all, but instead helps you grapple with the power of youth or innocence more broadly. Or maybe in the course of your research, you found some interesting essay about, say, the Joan of Arc archetype, and you could use it as a lens to understand Greta and her power. In fact, you're kind of a rock star if you can do this, and it greatly increases your chances of doing something truly original, rather than just using the same ingredients as everyone else and just making something a little less good. So now, instead of getting lost in a boundless sea of information, we've got a question that definitely doesn't have an obvious answer, and it's not the kind of question where we're just playing catch-up to figure out facts and background and context that other people already know, even if it's new to us. And I hope you're starting to see how much better it is to start with the question of what we need sources to help us do, rather than fixating on what a source statically is. And once you know what you need sources to help you do, that's where someone like a reference librarian can come in handy. People tend to think of librarians as kindly old women who recommend chapter books, but at universities, reference librarians are highly specialized, experts in their fields, so if ever you can't find a source or don't know where to start, remember that a reference librarian is probably going to be your best friend. And by the way, when we reframe our thinking to ask what sources help us do rather than what they statically are, we might begin to see that a breakdown like primary, secondary, and tertiary sources isn't really even all that helpful, because a single source can be multiple things. For example, the same source can give you reliable background information or context about your topic, and it could also provide you an argument to build on or a theory to rely on and use as a lens onto other material. And by recentering our focus on what you, the writer, are doing rather than what the sources are saying, you're much more likely to stay in the driver's seat rather than letting your sources take control.
Wait! Two people can't drive at the same time?
What does any of this have to do with the real world, you might be wondering? Well, for one thing, scientists and engineers spent countless hours understanding what is known about their topic in order to answer really specific, good research questions that lead to new knowledge. And people at major tech companies or think tanks make policy suggestions based on research guided by a really specific question. Okay, 2 final thoughts. You might be thinking to yourself, how am I ever going to do something original when countless people who came before me and know much more than I do have already said and done everything there is to say? First of all, don't be so sure. Every semester with my students, I see people pursuing really specific, highly focused, and interesting research questions that often lead them into brand new territory. In college, you're practicing the skills and mindset you need to work carefully with sources in order to one day say something truly original when you become the master of your domain. And remember that in college, it's generally enough if whatever you've come up with in the time and space you have is original to you. On that note, remember that you can't simply ignore a source that seems to be saying exactly what you thought you were saying, even if you find it really late in the game. If you find a source that's saying exactly what you plan to say, remember it's good news, because it means that someone else who's smart thought the same way you did, and you can use their argument as a starting point to get deeper, more specific, and more nuanced with what you're saying. And a final word of warning before I send you on your way. Beware the dangers of confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is our tendency to interpret new evidence or information through the lens of our existing beliefs or theories. Scientists and social scientists worry about this all the time, and so should any rigorous thinker. That's why you should never set out to prove something. Instead, ask a genuine, good faith, open-ended question and set out to answer it, no matter where that answer leads you. When you've got an agenda or preconceived notions about your topic, you're much more likely to overlook important facts and come to faulty conclusions. I'll see you in the stacks.